Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the thematic track Just Transition for Land Based Climate Action in India for the 23rd edition of World Sustainable Development Summit 2024. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Veena CP. I'm a research associate at TERI and will be emceeing today's proceedings. Before we start the session, I request that all attendees to keep their phone on silent mode. To set the stage for today's discussion, we are honored to have with us Ms. Surchi Badwal, Senior Fellow and Director, Earth Science and Climate Change Division, TERI, for the introductory address. Ms. Badwal leads research activities in the area of climate change, focusing mainly on impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation assessments. She is also listed as a UNDP regional roster of expert on vulnerability and adaptation. She has been identified as a member by the Planning Commission as part of the Working Group on Climate Change and Environment for the 12th five-year plan and has actively engaged with the International Human Dimensions Program and IPCC events. Her contribution include being a lead author for the IPCC reports, including AR4 and AR6, and a review editor for AR5 and the special report and extreme events. Ms. Badwal, the floor is yours.
So should I sit and speak? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Veena. And first of all, let me welcome you all to this post-lunch session. I think we are still expecting some people to trickle in. And the purpose of the session is to have a healthy discussion on the topic that we have over here on just transitions, on land-based climate actions. Of course, when we're talking about land-based climate actions, the focus is both on adaptation and mitigation. But the objective is basically to see what kind of projects can be developed in this particular area and what is the potential that we can see in India that can be created. And in that whole process that we are talking about with regards to these, actions that are being taken forward, what kind of a just process can be introduced in the whole approach. Let me welcome you all to this track. While India has declared its net zero goal with contributions from every sector, one of the things we clearly realize that to reach that particular goal of, despite all the efforts that will be put in the other sectors, the role of the land sector will be an important role with regards to us hitting that mark of zero, if I were to say, right, to declare ourselves as net zero. So the importance of the measures that are being taken in this particular sector with regards to the net zero efforts that are basically being pushed. In India's decarbonization efforts that we are talking about, I think the land sector will have to play a very important role in the near future, in the coming decades. We're already seeing projects being rolled out in these areas, whether it's with the wish and will or without the will of the government. There are projects out there that are being implemented, and let's acknowledge and recognize that. And these are projects that are being basically taken forward, in the Red Plus area. Maybe they started with the initial thought of the government wanting to see how these can be rolled out, some on a case study mode or model. I would say there are now efforts that are being put towards promoting afforestation, reforestation measures, rehabilitation of land that has basically been, in the mining areas, land that has been left fallow. And also now we are hearing about the use of renewables and agriculture together on land, and how these are various examples that we are seeing unfolding, and whether it's the public sector which is promoting it or the private sector which is promoting it, it is happening out there. And therefore we need to kind of take cognizance, acknowledge that, and in that process basically see, while these changes are being promoted or taken forward or implemented, what kind of transitions are happening in that transitions process, who are the winners, who are the losers, where are the opportunities, where are the barriers, where we can basically use those barriers to understand them better, to change them across to opportunities. So those kind of things that we are interested in terms of seeing how in this transitions process we can basically contribute. The study basically, so this is a study supported by the ICC, the India Climate Collaborative. It has I would say it has two large components of it. One is with regards to looking at the role of the land sector in India's net zero process. So the top-down approach that we talk about, where we are dealing with a lot of data and information that is available, through secondary sources to understand the contributions of the FOLU sector to the entire, mitigation discourse. And on the other hand, basically, having a bottom-up approach, which is basically, so whatever you get to understand through data and secondary sources and information that you collect may not be the same when you actually go down and start talking to different stakeholders and people who are in the process of taking things forward, implementing things. On the ground, things and the situation, the ground realities change, and therefore basically to capture those ground realities, having a bottom-up approach where we're looking at different landscapes where these projects are being implemented, the different stakeholders that are engaged in the process, and their contributions and their understanding on how they benefit or they lose out in the whole gameplay that we are talking about. So that's the whole understanding that we are trying to develop. And in that process, then how can we basically change the whole scenario, the picture towards a winning game in this sector while we are going through this transitions process, and of course documenting those learnings and seeing how we can take it forward with the government, with other entities and stakeholders that are important in the process. So again, I would like to welcome you all, and of course I'm also keen in terms of learning from you while I'm sitting here and seeing how is it that we can further strengthen the work that we are doing, and possibly also see what is it that we can do further together in this particular area of work. So with that, I would close and move, request my colleague to basically move on with the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the insightful address and briefing us about the topic. Now, we move forward to the presentation around the scope of work and findings from our project, Just Transition for Land-Based Climate Action in India. For that, I invite Ms. Charu Tiwari, Senior Manager, Forestry and Biodiversity, IORA Ecological Solutions Private Limited, and Mr. Amlan Mishra, Research Associate, Earth Science and Climate Change Division, TERI, for the presentations.
Thanks, Veena. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be presenting the project. We'll be briefly introducing that, and then Amlan will be taking it forward. So what we have, what IORA has been doing is taking the top-down approach, which is around mitigation and what are the policies, what are the targets in the land sector, and then we are kind of building on that, how we can take it forward and mainstream that into policy. So I'll just tell you briefly about IRA. So we are a leading organization for implementing NBS, established in 2009. IORA has grown into becoming one-stop solution for climate action, for ecological restoration, landscape conservation, and sustainable agriculture. And some of our key areas of expertise include carbon project development, remote sensing and GIS, climate finance, and policy advisory. So regarding the mitigation strategies from the FOLU sector, as we all know, I think I don't need to delve much deeper into this. So some examples of the FOLU mitigation, as Suruchi also mentioned, are afforestation, reforestation, sustainable land management. So they are basically aimed at reducing emissions and increasing carbon sequestration. And regarding about the project, so we have an overarching goal of developing kind of society, the policies where we have socially inclusive and equitable process of equitable process for land-based mitigation solutions, in which we, as I already mentioned, we are taking the top-down approach, and bottom-up approach Amlan will be explaining you later. So regarding the goal setting, so what kind of goals from the policies we have right now? We have the nationally determined contributions, which are the NDCs, in which we have 2070 net zero target. Apart from that, we have 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon equivalent sequestration from additional forest and tree cover. And other than that, we have multiple G20 targets. We have from Mission Life, we have Atmanirbhar Bharat, we have National Solar Mission, and all the policies which we have not shown here because of the kind of shortage of time. But these are some of the targets that we would like to highlight. Under the project, we developed a GHG inventory for 2020 baseline, where we calculated the emissions from different sectors in FOLU, including agriculture soils, rice, agriculture soils, that is fertilizer use, livestock emissions, enteric fermentation, and manure management, forestry and TOF, forest removal, which are emission removal, and also for emissions from forest burning. Sorry. And we have used the IPCC good practice guidelines and secondary literature to gather data for that and create the inventory. So the inventory provides us a baseline from which we can see how we have to move forward towards going to net zero, and how we can move that in a just manner for the, as you know, the theme is the just transition, so accordingly. And as moving forward, we have kind of also done a goal setting analysis in which we are highlighting the reduction potential from different sectors. So I'm not showing every sector here. We are taking two sectors as an example just to show, because it will be very, I think, complicated. So first sector that we are taking is livestock, which is one of the major sector for emissions. And so based on the historical trends, we did a linear projection to see how much of the emissions will be there for the 2070, and also in between till 2030 and 47, which are kind of the milestone years for our for the country. And as you can see, there is a gradual decrease in the emissions from coming from the projections, but the gradual increase might not be enough. So we might need to supplement it with different kind of mitigation measures, which include increase in the inclusion of feed additives and options of change in dietary habits, better quality of green fodder, better livestock management practices, which will not only increase the health and survival rate of the livestock, but also help in reducing emissions. Then in the forestry sector, we have the reported forestry cover currently is 24.62% of the total for total geographical area, with 17 states having higher than 33% forestry cover. And total greenwash area is 9.5 million hectare, which is shown an increase from the last year report of ISFR 2019. But the increasing trend in forestry, greenwash, forest cover, greenwash, and carbon sequestration has been mapped, and kind of we have done a projection also for that. In the projection, you can clearly see that the sequestration, although is increasing, but as per the National Forest Policy, which says 33% of land, should be under forest cover, we still stand at the deficit of 14.85 million hectares, which we like in the scenarios we have presented can be fulfilled from agroforestry, domestic plantation, restoration of degraded areas, and better plantation management. The BOR3 reports also mentions us analysis of additional incremental annual mitigation potential from additional hectares which are being restored or managed in a better sense. So for example, we take eco restoration of degraded open forest. So for each additional 3 million hectares that is being restored, an incremental potential of 27 million tons of carbon dioxide is there. And if all the potentials, all the potential and increment is done at 100% rate, at 100% efficiency, we stand at creating an additional sink of 55 million tons of carbon dioxide. Then it is also important to just not focus on mitigation, but kind of explore synergies with different sectors, because we have different approaches for agriculture, for forestry. So we have also mapped synergies in order with mitigation potential. So with forest adaptation, forest-based adaptation, including sustainable forest management, forest cover, restoration, and afforestation, which has the highest mitigation potential and also highest synergies with different sectors. Then comes agroforestry, biodiversity management, improved cropland management, and resilient power systems. We have also mapped agricultural subsectors which have highest mitigation potential, which is rice and livestock, wheat, cattle, and all those, as you can see. So this is important to focus on because we can then design strategies to tap into the mitigation potential of these sectors, and also uh, strategize the areas where we want to have kind of integrated approach, or have forest based approach, and also say kind of increase livelihoods. So yeah, under the project we did consultation with key stakeholder groups. So we designed project based themes and mapped them across different categories of stakeholders, which are policymakers, which is government officials, implementation organizations, and funding agencies, as you can see here. So we had different set of questions prepared for each stakeholder group, and we conducted unstructured and semi-structured interviews to gather information on the broad thematic areas. So when we are talking about just transition, so there are many risks, barriers, and trade-offs which should be mapped to for us to be better prepared for including for improving our planning, and subsequently our implementation. So in the barriers that have come up during our study, from the policy review, from the stakeholder consultation, majority of them have been centered around displaced impact, which are because of not taking a systems approach. Sometimes there is a displaced impact on different sectors. So if we are saying only mitigation, there might be some kind of disbalance in the ecological nature of the ecological fabric of the region. So it's important to see that we take a systems approach, an integrated approach, considering intersectoral and also intrasectoral factors. Then there is a, as Suruchi also mentioned, that land sector will be very important in the coming years for mitigation purpose. So there is a pressure on kind of forestry to carry out to kind of take forward the ambitious target. And then there is the choices matter. For example, there are promotion of certain livestock species can also hamper, kind of disbalance the fodder availability or water resource. So we have to see, we have to be very kind of aware and careful with our choices moving forward with the strategies. And then we have the farmers, which are carrying the burden of mitigation strategies right now. So it is important to support them as well in the process. Then there is a limited incentive for increasing productivity of cattle. Also on the health side or survival side, it's important to include that in our policy context. And then there is a lack of strategies for offsetting additional cost or emissions from cattle or from different sectors. And there is increased risk of unregulated breeding, or from a lot of risk from the unorganized sector also. Is my time up? Okay, just I'll just take 5 more minutes. So we have also mapped economic and social trade-offs in the, I will not go into details of that. The key learnings that we have come up with are kind of having an integrated approach, bringing context specific challenges into the picture, into the planning process. And planning at a landscape level, where we can plan better for the nexus of water, energy, climate, and agriculture. And then we have inclusive and innovative approaches should be included, where we can see, we can include communities, we can include technology, we can include modeling for better planning and better risk management as well. We should have a long-term vision for mitigation, so that we don't have like a unplanned shift towards any kind of intervention. Then we have dual approach, which is highly recommended in all the consultation, which is we focus parallelly on emission reduction as well as on sequestration. And then with the another theme that is very important has come up across in all the consultations is livelihood and food security. Then we have the emerging solutions are basically have better planning with ground level data, effective implementation, so that there is the interest of the government should also turn into action, should also turn into measurable results. And then we have monitoring and better planning, promotion of high value crops, multi-cropping system, tree based farming, food forest, and landscape and restoration activities, which should be also integrated with the mitigation benefits. So it should not be solely mitigation focused, but also important to see other ecological benefits in the process. And then for to mainstream in the policy, it's important to uh, uh, bind them with the incentive models to support for farmers during the transition, convergence and interministerial approach for various schemes to be kind of planned together, implemented together. Then we have retrospective evaluation, which means we we plan for the past scheme should be kind of evaluated, and their automatic kind of their benefits from mitigation for green credit kind of scheme should also be auto calculated and turned into the system. Then we should have measurable matrices for assessment, including ecological, social, cultural aspects, and along with mitigation. And then apart from effective implementation, we have leveraging financial institutions, climate finance, blended finance schemes, and inclusion of gender and behavioral change. So thank you, everyone. I'll pass on to Amlan.
Thank you, Charu, for the comprehensive presentation. It was very insightful and I have to follow that. So thank you for that. So I want to present the bottom-up view that once we have the stock take, the policy and the inventorization, how does it affect people on the ground, what we believe of mitigation strategies, what we believe in climate change, and are they even aware of the transition risks that they face in the current world? So a quick note about TERI. We are hosting WSDS, and this is our 50th year of our organization. And we have worked extensively on climate change from a policy, from adaptation, from mitigation, and all other sides as well. I'll quickly move on. So a quick note about the project from our side. The way we have approached it is to first have an overview of what does land use climate action mean, and how do we develop a climate justice lens to see if climate action is undertaking positive impacts or negative impacts to the communities on the ground. Then there is no point in having a theoretical model unless it is field tested on the ground, which is where we have undertaken different site visits to understand if the just transition lens that we have conceptualized can actually be operationalized on the ground or not. Moving on, we, as part of this today's event as well, we want to understand the stakeholders, the policymakers, and as well as the donors of climate action about how this just transition lens can be operationalized, and then move forward to policy recommendations in the future. Quick note about just transitions and land use, which I won't linger on for too long because it's already been discussed. But mostly in terms of India, we want to believe that it should be an equitable process and it should be inclusive as well, because as we have discussed multiple times, just transition in India needs to be an economic shift that brings together all stakeholders and creates transformative economic change. So a quick note on the just transition lens that we have theoretically developed based on different theories, different understanding and literature reviews, that there should be no harm done and it should prioritize people and nature. There should be representation, recognition and redistribution, that we understand climate change affects people differently. All of them have a say in how it is addressed and that there is redistributive impacts for the same. There needs to be a socio-cultural and capability shift because the new economy will require new capacities. The solutions need to be causal and contextual because land and ecology is different throughout the country. And most importantly, these solutions should be sustainable and long-term and should not be carried out in a project-based manner. So the case studies, we have actually undertaken 4 site visits under this project. The first one is at Muri, Jharkhand, where there is the treatment of red mud near the Hindalco plant. And it is being undertaken by the TERI TERI team on site through afforestation. Throughout their work, they have reduced the alkalinity of the water from, I think, it was 10 when they started, and now it is back to pH neutral. And at the same time, because they have involved the community from the inception of the project, because the most interest that the people had in the intervention was not the water quality, but to have a nursery and a plantation on site so that they can carry out some other economic activities through plantations. Similarly, another very interesting case study is that of community-based REDD Plus in Khasi Hills in Meghalaya. Itself has actually approached Plan Vivo International to carry out REDD Plus because of increasing deforestation and increasing challenges to their community. And from there, they themselves have capacitated themselves to carry out socio-economic activities, to carry out cultural activities, all from the carbon selling that they create. So there is a forestry team that takes care of carbon stocks, and the money is then channeled to the socio-economic team that helps in building capabilities throughout the community. And it's a very interesting case study in how community-based projects can be built around climate action. One from an established project to an inception project is the valuation of ecosystem services of wetlands in Ladakh, where the wetlands of Ladakh are a very interesting case because they are both the livelihood of the state in terms of the tourism and the ecotourism they provide, but they are also sites for protected animals and and there's also a huge national security concern with the area. But it is interesting to note how people visualize how these services might, affect them in the future, how they believe they can profit from the same. And it is really interesting to understand how we can involve the local communities from the baseline part of a project as well. And after all the remote settings, it's also good to know that we can carry out land-based climate action in cities, which is why we also reached out to the Urban Afforestation Initiative in Kochi, Kerala, where the afforestation has begun through planting trees in schools, but now it is being increased to communities. And they have seen how an afforestation drive can also be a good measure to make the next generation aware of the climate risks they face, and how land-based climate action can be incorporated into school curriculums as well. So some of the key findings to operationalize our transition lens from all these sites, we have asked questions mostly in a discussion basis around the 7 different topics of the lens. Planning, how much the communities are involved from the inception of the project, how they're involved in conceptualizing the project. The communities themselves aware of the transition risks that are happening from the forest, from their action. For example, say our REDD plus communities aware of the fact that maybe of the risks of say monocultures, etc. Is there a socio-economic impact to the intervention being undertaken? Say, for example, if there is urban afforestation, does it have a long-term benefit to the community beyond just cooling and health? Is there a local emphasis to the project? Is the project being undertaken through just a broader scheme of things, or does it involve the local community and provide benefits to them? Is there a transformative long-term change instead of just a piloting of a project or just a short-term project? How much of gender inclusivity is there? And it is also interesting to note how we visualize gender inclusivity. For example, in the Hindalco plant, women were encouraged to come and work on the sites and plantations, but they refused to do so because they refused to wear the protective shoes being provided on site. So how do we include gender inclusivity in terms of the social norms and the cultures that are so prevalent throughout the country? And lastly, how sustainable is the long-term intervention? Are we carrying out an intervention as part of a project and moving on, or can it be handed over for the community to carry out in more detail in the long run? So based on all of that, some of the potential policy recommendations that we're still working on are around how we can rethink climate intervention design by including the value of nature and land from the get-go. Can we include communities in the design of climate intervention itself? And how we can provide opportunities for local business development alongside treating climate, affecting climate action? How do we integrate essential voices in terms of communities, in terms of women, and in other marginalized groups? And how do we ensure that gender accounting is undertaken in policy design, which has been a long-standing idea of India? How do we build institutional capacity to carry out these interventions? And by institutional capacity, I mean local and subnational and national institutional capacity. For example, can we build policy coordination across different parts of the country? Can we have knowledge sharing between different climate interventions undertaken throughout the country so that we learn from best practices, not only on a global scale, but from within India as well? And how can we establish a central body that can ensure that there is climate finance to sustain these interventions in the long run? And lastly, it is always good to have all this information beyond just presentations and in a centralized database that everyone can access and generate and create. And for that, should we have local MEL systems? How do we create data repositories and policy repositories for further climate intervention design? So I'll stop here and I look forward to the panel discussion to help us design this policy measures in much, much more detail. But we have conceptualized some of these ideas in a policy brief that we had presented to the Think 20 of the G20, and you can read that here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charu and Amlan, for the presentations and giving us a brief explanation about the objectives and the learnings of the project. With this, we will move forward to a panel discussion where we have esteemed panelists who will delve deeper into the to discuss on the scope and potential for just transitions for land-based climate action in India. Moderating this discussion, we have Ms. Surchi Badwal, Director from Earth Science and Climate Change Division, TERI. I welcome you, ma'am. Our panelists for today's discussion are Dr. Archana Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is currently serving as the National Coordinator for at the International Union for Conservation of Nature India office. She also worked as a project manager for another IUCN initiative, Ecosystem for Life, a Bangladesh in India initiative, leading the India component. Before joining IUCN, she was working with UNESCO New Delhi office as the National Project Coordinator, World Heritage Biodiversity Program, India. She also has worked as a head regional program on Himalayan high altitude wetlands and rivers, WWF India. Her primary areas of expertise include wetland management, environmental flows, and transboundary water management. I welcome you, ma'am. Next, we have Dr. Ritu Mathur. Dr. Mathur is a climate and energy policy expert with a master's degree in business economics, Delhi University, and a PhD in energy science from Kyoto University, Japan. She has 3 decades of working and teaching expertise in the areas of energy and climate policy, sustainable development, and integrated assessments and energy system modeling. She is currently serving as the senior energy consultant at Niti Aayog, tasked with the setting up and leading modeling and integrated assessment unit in the energy climate domain. Prior to her current position, Dr. Mathur was a senior fellow and director at TERI and adjunct faculty at TERI SAS. Dr. Mathur has also contributed to the IPCC as the lead author in the 5th and 6th AR reports and the 6th Global Environment Outlook as well. I welcome you, Dr. Mathur. Next, we have Mr. Subhash Chandra. Mr. Chandra is the member of Indian Forest Service. Currently, he is serving as the Chief Executive Officer, National Compensatory Afforestation Fund Management and Planning Authority. He is tasked to oversee afforestation for compensation laws of forest and ecosystem services. He held additional charges of the Director General of Forest in the Ministry of Environment and Forest Climate Change, and also as the Director of Indian Institute of Forest Management, Bhopal. Earlier, he has served as the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Mines, Deputy Inspector General of Forest Policy in the Ministry of Environment and Forest. He also works as the Director of Horticulture at New Delhi Municipal Council. I welcome you, Mr. Chandra. Next, we have Ms. Sambita Ghosh. Ms. Sambita Ghosh leads the Climate Adaptation and Nature-Based Solution portfolio at WWF India. In her role as a senior specialist, she is involved in the strategic planning, management, and leadership on the design and implementation of nature-based and climate resilience-based programs across in the different landscapes and riverscapes in India. She has more than a decade experience in research, design, and implementation of climate action projects and programs in developing and least developed countries. Prior to WWF India, Sambita worked as associate fellow with TERI, where she engaged in research and policy development and dialogue with a broad range of stakeholders to develop key outputs like National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture and several state action plans on climate change. Welcome, Ms. Ghosh. Next, lastly, we have Mr. Piyush Dogra. Mr. Dogra is a civil and environmental engineer by training and is currently working as a senior environmental specialist in the World Bank Group Delhi office. Mr. Dogra has applied his technical knowledge in the leading the safeguards work on hydropower and water resources for the India program, and has also contributed to the bank's dialogue on the core sectors of green of energy, water resources, forestry, and environmental management. Currently, he's leading 3 operations in India on national resource management, water resources, and forestry. And is also contributing towards regional technical assistance on sediment management in hydro sector through green initiatives. He also works on the green issues in India and has supported bank operations in Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our moderator and panelists. Let us now proceed with an engaging panel discussion. I welcome you all.
Thank you, everyone. And having heard the 2 presentations and realizing the relevance of land-based measures being implemented in a net zero process, and also the just transitions needs that need to be embedded in the whole implementation that we're talking about. I think a couple of questions that come to my mind, and you can feel free to respond to these questions apart from your reflections on the presentations that you just saw, which basically dictates the work that is being carried out. I think the questions that I had in my mind was with regards to the complexities around the just transitions process with regards to land-based mitigation measures. And if there are some, if you could please throw some reflections on that. How do you think the scope of such measures can be defined? What kind of policy, regulatory, institutional support, is needed to help achieve this, and whether it's needed at all or not is something that we'd like to hear from you. And of course, how do you ensure that the transition process ensures a fair and equitable ground for different sects of the society? So with that, basically, I would like to open the floor for the discussion, and we can move from here to there in terms of taking your views. I'd first request Ms. Archana Chatterjee to give her views with regard to what she's just heard, and maybe if you want to add your own points in the process. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it was a very interesting and this is a very timely discussion. First, a very quick reflection. I don't know, there must be a reason behind it, but I missed seeing the impact of land-based RE technologies that has not been taken up in this study. So it is mostly the FOLU sector that has been tackled with, but the RE also needs a lot of land, and that is also affecting people, as we have seen in so many instances happening all around Rajasthan and so on, where local communities have gone to court, impacting their livelihoods and so on. So that is one thing. From IUCN point of view, I think the key aspect that we look at in energy transitions is the biodiversity impacts on biodiversity and the ecosystems. So be it RE, I think that there it's very evident. I mean, I have some data I would like to quote that 165 countries, they have RE targets. They have, made it public. out of which 10.2% share is of wind and solar, and out of which 15% installations are in important conservation areas. So you could imagine the impact on the biodiversity and ecosystem services, which again links back to the just transition, because that is from community perspective. So the ecosystems they depend on, if those are compromised, then of course the just transition is also compromised. So that is one point. The other point is that we while we say this, the Afolu sector, nowadays the carbon projects are being developed with only the sole objective of being carbon, fixing carbon. But the other objectives of biodiversity conservation and bringing back some of those ecosystem services sometimes is missed out. So I think that was highlighted in the presentation also, that we do need to consider those aspects. And from our perspective, that is really important, that all the transitions are nature positive. Maybe I'll stop here and then we can come back later.
Sure, we can move.
Thank you, Suruchi ma'am. In fact, very beautiful presentations were made, and this just transitions which we are discussing today, in fact, the study I have gone through at some time back, it is a very good effort to work on land use based climate actions. But what we find, because the participants here are quite young and they have to see the changes which will be happening in coming 3-4 decades. So it matters the most for you on the audience side, because if we see in our journey to this stage of last 3-4 decades have been very, very significant. If we see the land use changes in our country, if we don't see the European and American changes in the land use, because being a developing country, our aspirations for a dignified living for a substantial chunk of population, because we are the highest among the highest populated nations, I think we are first, and the cattle population is also 18% of the world. So our priorities are quite complex, because we have, from the government perspective or the societal perspective, we have to see that everybody gets dignified living, their aspirations are met, and we require a lot of investment in basic infrastructure. It may be road, railways, airport, housing. So if we treat that land is a constant at this stage, will not be justified, because if you are coming from Gurgaon or in even NCT of Delhi, the adjoining cities, lot of construction is happening, and this construction is not happening in isolation. It is because of housing needs of people coming to this region. They are trying to accommodate here. The industry is vying for space. The commerce is happening. A lot of institutions are developing, and this journey is from last, you can say, 3-4 decades, and it is in major, you can say, major happening this time. So when a housing or industry grows around a city, it takes into the agriculture fields. So it creates crisis for food. Then agriculture fields shift to common or community land. So wherever it is, the land is available, even forest. So mentioning this is because the situation is very, very complex. And if we have to take into account the global factors, especially the climate change and land degradation, which will have great impact on our survival and sustainability. We think ourselves as center, but there are, uh, if we see 18% of the global cattle population is here, there are so much wildlife here. On whose perspective, who will be thinking? So our aim is how we accommodate their interest in human-centric development approach. One model will not be of very helpful. So we have to have millions of, or you can say, if not millions, thousands of good models coming up for accommodating these diverse needs and giving the best to the people, at the same time conserving the natural resources and the wild animals and our cattle population. The policies, in fact, policies, you might be observing that a lot of policies are also being evolving, because the magnitude for our country, for a size of population, this magnitude is immense. So it requires very thoughtful, like we have to see how energy security is maintained, how food security is maintained, how water security is maintained. The government in its part is trying trying to accommodate all these things. Like you might have be aware of our Honorable Prime Minister's focus on Mission Life, which is livelihood for environment. At the same time, the ministry has initiated Green Credit Program. We are just coordinating, because this is not linked to the ministry or government-driven program. It is voluntary. Apart from this mandatory, or we can say this, what we have discussed, like lecture, like Red Plus and other, it is voluntary, because every one of us has to contribute in this, so that our pressure, our footprints on nature are reduced, minimized. And this Green Credit Program also calls for positive incentives to what is sustainable life, sustainable action, sustainable, or you can say pro-planet action by each individual is incentivized. So as ma'am said, that we have to see that policy, regulatory framework and institutional support is there, and it is evolving with the how we progress on this front. But seeing in isolation, like government, private sector, public, and from the society, everybody has to join this, so that our combined footprints on the natural resources or land, which is which is necessary for our survival, is maintained in the best possible form. If we are able to manage this and try to bring equitable and fair, we can't say that everybody will get its best, but this provides for conflict resolution, how we best address the concerns and genuine concerns of the land users, be it agriculture, industry, transport, energy, in a comprehensive way. That will be the key. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. I think we heard the first two panelists basically reflect on land competitiveness for various reasons, whether it is for urbanization or in your case, you mentioned about the need for expansion of renewables, and of course the importance of the sector with regards to just not looking at it as a carbon storehouse, but also the ecosystem services and the biodiversity around the sector, and the many benefits that we draw out of it. We also interestingly heard from Mr. Chandra about the focus of the government with regards to human-centric development. And in that process, whatever services can be provided, the objective of the government is basically to look at how those services can be provided, whether we are talking about energy security, water security, or food security. And of course, the focus of the government on various programs through which it's encouraging individuals to basically, contribute in whatsoever way with regards to reducing their footprints and contributing to conservation. So with that, and it's interesting because in the other session just before this session that I was focusing on sustainable agricultural practices, and one of the comments was made about the value of land and how the value of land basically changes. When you're in an urban area, possibly the cost of the land is far higher compared to when you're in a rural area, or maybe a peri-urban area, which is very much attached to a large metropolitan area. So how the value of land also changes, and in that the land competitiveness, and then what aspect of what needs to be done on that piece of land basically wins the discussion versus what the land should have been used for. So where are studies like that done, which basically demarcate, and we were talking about it in the agricultural sector, that most of our productive land seemingly is being shifted towards urbanization, and the purpose for which that land could have been used basically has been, now it's not being used for that purpose. So bringing in those dimensions as well, that how do we decide when land is being shifted from one category to the other of the type of use that it is being put to? Because maybe when we are doing that, we are not accounting for all the benefits the land can give us while we are making those shifts and the decision making that happens around it. It's just a question in the wild, and of course you could come back to it, and we move over to Ritu Mathur to provide her comments, and then maybe we can come back to the discussion later.
Yeah, thank you, Suruchi. So just to again come back to the presentation, and I completely agree with the first comment that was made, that I think the point about missing out on renewables, I think is important, because that is a key component, and it also connects with the point that you just made, that whenever we are bringing in any new technology, including cleaner energy technologies, what is the land value on which you're bringing these technologies, and what use should it be put to, is one of the most important questions. In fact, in another session also, there was at least an allusion to what happens to retiring coal-based plants. Normally, the thermal coal-based plants have a fair amount of land on which they are constructed. When you decommission these plants, that land is still available. So can you repurpose this land and use the same land area for other clean energy purposes as well, is also an element which comes into the discussion of moving to a net zero roadmap. So that's a little bit on the energy front. But coming back to the afforestation and follow kind of measures, I think again the project, especially on the bottom up side, had mentioned a lot about the inclusion of the social and the gender dimensions and many of these other things, which I think is absolutely critical now as we move ahead in terms of implementing what we need to do in our action towards net zero. So no longer can we stay with indicators of things at the national level. When we are talking about
any anything being taken up, if you're going to need transformative changes, holistic changes, they have to cut across society in terms of being able to generate livelihoods, in terms of looking at the gender aspect, in terms of generating additional value add, in terms of looking at the ecology as a whole, and looking at the entire ecosystem in terms of developing. And again, very interestingly, one had heard about an initiative recently, I think somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, if I'm not mistaken, where a person had, I think from one of the IITs, had looked at rejuvenating a piece of degraded land, many hectares of it, to make it into a forested area, but depended on nothing from outside that boundary. So if there was no water to start watering the plants once you planted them, he first also generated and sort of dug up the wells and created water bodies in the area. He got the people from the local areas to get involved in planting the forests, making sure that the species which were used were also local species, which could generate food, which could generate fodder, which could generate other means of livelihood for the people. And it was a kind of thing which just set things rolling, because people could see the value add, they could see themselves being engrossed in the activities and seeing livelihoods for themselves, being able to see activity, and the birds and the animals and everything sort of got regenerated. So I think it's those kind of holistic measures that we need to look at, and these again therefore are extremely location specific and context specific. So we have to move from those macro aspects to the micro aspects. Having said that, what was also pointed out in the study was something on monitoring and better planning. And there I come to again the nitty-gritties and the granularities on, are we looking at what are we monitoring? Whatever indicators these are these indicators which talk across the activities that you will monitor? Are there commonalities in these indicators? Only if there are commonalities and ways to track one against the other in common kind of boundaries will you be able to look at scaled up transformation. We've always talked about successful studies, one-off case studies, and there are many examples of that. What we need today is not the same. We don't need more of the same thing. We need transformative changes. So we need more of something very different. And I think what is different when I look at that is the need to be able to replicate things in similar contextualizations. So when we're looking at those things to monitor, I think again, if we can categorize sensibly what are these indicators, and again, what data is needed. So the study looks at a very, very vast number of linkages, and I think it's extremely holistic, which is very good. But again, when we look at sectoral focus, we would tend to think that you need more a follow kind of indicators.
Yeah.
But here you would need socioeconomic kind of indicators.
Maybe
you would
looking
need
at something
very
else
different
outside,
kind of indicators which are outside the boundary of your comfort zone. But the point is to be able to link up with all of that data, create that data if it does not exist. Initially, maybe through secondary sources, but even through surveys and so on. And of course, to then see how we can make these data available to others. So again, in order to become transformative, it is not a one-off study that we should be looking at. It should be a framework which can be accepted, emulated, used, and scaled up by others. So I think that's what I had to say for now. I'll come back.
Yeah, thanks for when you're looking at that particular sector? Are you missing out on some important aspects that connect to the issue that you're studying but have not been taken into account in the process? Thank you for that. And we move over to our next panelist, Mr. Piyush Dogra. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think very interesting discussion. My approach is more towards the operationalization part, because we are working more in the field, so it would be good to also understand that part. Very clearly, if you ask me to talk about the presentation which was made, this has, I'm really glad that this is taking up both approaches. One is from the top down, they're clearly looking at the existing policies and existing structure which is available in India. And from the bottom side, they have reached out to certain projects where you can correlate whether such kind of processes can be implemented or not. The missing part, Archana ji and Ritu ji have already mentioned, is the mining part. And mining part also, I would like to emphasize more on the repurposing of mines. Because the government is, when you talk about just transition these days, it's more related to only renewables. They're talking about energy. They're not talking about our narrative of forest FULU sector, which we are saying. So one is your narrative in this study should be more focused on, I won't say that, we have to advocate it, that the forest and FULU sector, we need to highlight, but it is important in the overall just transition debate. And without taking this into consideration, probably the NDC targets which Government of India is targeting may not be achievable. They can achieve it through transition of energy, but they may not be able to track the forest 2.5 to 3 billion contribution, which currently they have already targeted. So my request would be kindly highlight your narrative effectively in this, which is coming out. It will come out. I would also like to add on the Meghalaya case. I think they have indicated that's a good case study, but how far it has gone, that's also important to see. In Meghalaya, I think I'm working in Meghalaya for past 5 years, and there's also another project. I don't want to mention this because I'm leading this, but if you want to go, kindly see that project as well. That is Meghalaya Community-Led Landscape Management Project. It's a project where exactly what Ma'am Suruchi was mentioning. The challenge on the implementation part. What we have done there is, given a model of how the NRM orientation can be linked to land, and then village-based natural resource management plans, and then implement those with the focus on water security. So you are bringing a FULU sector, but it's a slightly different mode, but please look at it as well. So that's also a good way going forward. I think the other part from the overall challenges, we all agree that it's a multi-sectoral, and with India as such a vast geography, the just transition approach would be a very complex approach. As you were asking about challenges, I think that's the major challenge. This approach is complex, but what could be the immediate solutions? We, through Green India Mission, have also introduced in India on landscape management planning, landscape approach, but actually it is not happening. That is why, you see the allocation to Green India Mission has also reduced. Reason being that at the level of forest, it's again top-down approach. They're working with JFMCs, but not to that extent which is needed. I think that's another point which you can highlight, that for landscape approach, understanding of landscape needs to be taken care. It's not forest alone, but you have to come out of the forest also with the agriculture and your nexus with the water and energy where you're looking at it. So that's another complex area, but that's the area where we should focus. There also, I think we are working with, Sir has also had a discussion with us on Indian Institute of Forest Management is helping us in developing those modules on landscape management based on special technologies. Probably that could be one area where we can bring awareness to our forest officers through academies, and also through administrative officers through academies, so that when in the district the officers are going, they should have a clear understanding of this multi-sectoral approach, and bringing that multi-sectoral approach into the planning part of it. That implementation will come later, but initially the planning, whether it's a village-based planning or a watershed-based planning, micro-watershed-based planning, that is very, very important in this context when we are looking at it from just transition perspective. I would also focus, and I really appreciate that this point of repurposing of mine has come. There is a data, Vasudha Foundation has done one study, and that data very clearly indicates that the mining is in fact repurposing is not being looked after from biodiversity perspective or from forestry management perspective. It's more towards expanding urban areas, putting more solar in that area, those kind of repurposing. And that is why land use land cover approach is not being followed. And we have cases where the expansion has taken more land, and that more land is forest and agriculture. So the Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and I think I have those numbers. Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, and Odisha, they have given numbers, and very clearly that 20 to 40% land which has been expanded to repurpose those mining areas is again forest and agriculture. So ultimately, that means the approach is not being followed. Approach is exactly on isolation, in isolations department wise, which we do generally. So that's it's important that in case of just transition, we should emphasize and advocate that the landscape based multi-sectoral approach is needed. And in that case, I think this also came out very clearly in your side, is the culture aspect of it. It's not with department alone, it's not with agriculture, water and other alone, but it's with the people. So communities and their culture with the environment is another important area which needs to be taken care. In this case, mining has taken it all to those communities. And I have worked in Northeast and I have greater experience that culturally they are so rich and protective about this forest and sacred groves and these areas. Probably this would be a very good approach to move forward in India. So that is one way of going forward. I think linking that with carbon and gains, why community should look for an NRM. I think we need to give them some incentive, whether we talk it livelihood or say economic benefit of something from the forestry or these agriculture, climate smart agriculture part. But that's also needs to be seen in this approach, which I was referring to is non-timber forest producer. In non-timber forest produce, if we identify one or two such resources in every state which can give high value forest produce, we generally talk about non-timber forest produce, but we should talk about high value forest produce. Herbs, medicines, natural fiber. This can be linked to the market linkage in a very effective manner, and this comes out in a landscape approach when we look. If we look at isolation, probably forest department don't have that kind of resource figure in their hand, that how much resource is available inside the forest. And then bringing community in line with sustainable harvesting and linking them with the private sector is equally important. In case of just transition, I'll close with this, that one is multi-sector, but there is also a combination of private and public important in this, because both in the government side also we have fund starvation, and even in the private side they will also look for funds effectively and using it more judiciously. So there is a need to discuss about the project financing, where that project financing will come, whether from green bonds or essentially, because we use green bonds, but those are not used for green initiatives. Let's use those green bonds for green initiatives and green jobs. So then this whole transition lens which we are talking about, probably more effective in this whole discussion. I'll stop here, ma'am. Thank you.
I think you highlighted the need for a multi-sectoral integrated outlook, in implementation with a focus on bottom-up approaches, and the need for looking at the incentive structures around such projects and how they are driven. And of course, looking at alternatives and high value alternatives that can basically help the community on the ground while we are looking for these transitions. And of course, the finance angle and the use of the finance for green initiatives. So we move on to our last panelist, and Sambita Ghosh, and then after that possibly we'll open a round of discussions with the floor, and of course also check with the panelists if they have something else to add. Sambita, over to you.
Okay, so it's been a very, very interesting discussion so far, and it's always a bit difficult to be the last speaker because so much of what you wanted to say has already been said. But having said that, I mean, there were such important points that were raised by the speakers and the other panelists before me, and I want to highlight something that Mr. Chandra said about the dynamic nature of the system. India is a developing country; we cannot deny that. But again, it brings us back into how we have to create a balance. How do we maintain our ecosystems the way they are while also accruing the benefits of a developed country? So and going on that path in a sustainable manner. And again, it again builds into what Ritu said about how you look at different kinds of ecosystems and the different trade-offs. So to look at just an example of that is to look at are we looking at a long-term strategy and vision? Where are we setting our goals? At a macro scale or at a granular level, which again Ritu mentioned, that we have to align these different priorities at different scales. So to look at these different things, because transition or transformation doesn't happen at one scale. Even the most vulnerable villages are transforming and transitioning. Even the most developed cities are transitioning, and and so are our systems. The climate impacts and the different phenomena that are surrounding us. So to look at the entire system as a dynamic in nature, and to see the plans that we have, the visions that we have, and how they translate into what will actually become in the future. So that's something that is quite important to understand. And then coming again to one of the first questions that Suruchi asked in her opening question was that, is policy support needed? Sometimes policy is the driver. The goals that we set at the national level are the drivers that help us to set our goals across every scale. So, and again, something that someone has already mentioned is that how we can look at a co-benefits approach, while a lot of times just transition is limited, the conversation is limited to energy. But then how can, when we talk about mitigation, or if we specifically talk about the FOLO sector, how can mitigation priorities be aligned with what adaptation needs at the local levels are? For example, we spoke about development, we spoke about cities, we spoke about aligning priorities. For example, a big city, which nowadays so many cities face consistent floods over years. How can we ensure development, but also look at, say, things like wetlands, which can act as natural flood buffers? And why can't we replenish those? Why can't we improve the water recharge structure and look at how these can contribute to not only mitigation goals, because if you know the statistic, wetlands can sometimes sequester 4%, 4 times more carbon than forests. So, that can be achieved through wetlands, better functioning ecosystems, better biodiversity, as Dr. Chatterjee said, better groundwater recharge, better water supply to domestic purposes and industrial purposes. So that, as well as the city develops at its own pace. So that's something that we need to look at when we talk about transitions. And secondly, when we talk about just transition, the ecosystems and local communities are something which are some of the most crucial things to understand, and their priorities need to be addressed, because without that, the scale up and the scale to which you want to maybe implement your projects and programs, they would be unsuccessful. So to look at that, and how then again tying it back to policy support, I'll give again go back to the example of wetlands. I mean, we haven't discussed it in the presentation so far because we focused on the polo sector, and wetlands were I noted not estimated. But given that that's the situation, you can look at how do you sorry, what was I saying?
The wetlands and
yeah, so it has not been considered so far. So sometimes, because they accrue so much of sequester so much of carbon, they can look at your mitigation potential, but also look at how does it tie up to benefits at the local level. And again, if you look at what the government has done with the Amrit Dharohar scheme, they have linked it to conservation of wetlands. But again, if you look at what the Ministry of Tourism has done, creating a capacity building program around it. So, if a wetland is supposed to be conserved, what is the local community around it doing if they are using that resource for a certain purpose? But the Ministry of Tourism now looks at development of ecotourism around those natural hotspots. So then you're creating additional livelihoods and incomes. So the trade-off is right there. So if you're using it for a certain purpose, and if your income is increasing, then you value your resource that much more. So I think that's something that's important to understand, that how, when we talk about transitioning systems or communities or resources, especially land-based, because land is such a complex and valuable resource. So to come back to that, when people understand the value of what is being put in, and then they don't feel that something that is being repurposed or being used for something else or being conserved, so to say, is actually being taken away from them, or is reducing their livelihoods, or negatively impacting their livelihoods and income. That's something you want to really address for your transition to be successful. And again, something that again looks at the long-term vision and strategy, as I mentioned earlier, is something we forget is aspirations. We were not what we were 10 years ago. Neither are the villagers from Jalna what they were 10 years ago. There's been an IT boom. There's AI now. Everybody has access to the internet. So people have different plans. So when you bring in inclusivity, are we looking at aspirations? Are we looking at what they want from the resources? And are we factoring that into what our the academia or the practitioners or the policymakers designed for them are? So again, coming back to aligning macro priorities with granular priorities. So that's something I wanted to say.
Those points, I think, points well taken on the aspirations and whose aspirations are we talking about and who's deciding on what with regards to the use of the land, the trade-offs in the use of the resource, the co-benefits approach that you just highlighted, and the dynamicity in the system. With that, I think we have heard our panelists, and I think we've got a rich set of views from the panelists, which are some of them connected, some of them diverse. We open the floor for a discussion, and if I could just see if there's a raise of hands, we could move on to you. In the next 5 minutes, take a few questions. The audience, anybody has a question, a pressing question? Yes.
So my question is it may not be directly related to the presentation or to exactly what the panelists talked about, but so I work with the West Bengal government, and there's a case. The East Kolkata wetlands are a Ramsar site located in the west in the city of Calcutta, and like those wetlands, most of our natural ecosystems in India face a lot of developmental pressure, especially by encroachment and other such ways of illegal and legal changes in land use. And those are it's a huge challenge to monitor land use change on a very localized or granular scale. So can there be collaborative initiatives using high resolution satellite imagery, or maybe other ways of monitoring this land use change and correcting or like taking initiatives to do something about it at an earlier stage rather than later? Because say for example, encroachment is detected in a wetland or in a forest or somewhere which is a protected area, again it's only limited to that where you can take any action, and the action so usually is filing a court petition or something related to that, and it takes a really long time. Eventually people, say for example in the East Kolkata wetlands, it's privately owned land, and the court prohibits its change in land use, and those people, although they depend on the wetlands for their livelihood, a developer, a real estate developer, offers them a lot of money, 10 times maybe more than what they would ever achieve in their lifetime. So how do we address such challenges on a local level?
Sure.
Would be
so the question is more gone towards the land competitiveness, and I think on monitoring, that's a different aspect altogether. And I think we're talking about just transitions and land-based mitigation measures that are being implemented. and yours is a direct question of monitoring and encroachment of land, etc. Right, for land competitiveness. I'm sure there are methods to monitor land, but of course, you could use satellite imagery and remote sensing. There's a lot of advancement in science and technology to do that, and I'm sure Mr. Subhash Chandra will support me because he's working with the Campa project, right? And methods exist, and definitely you need to use the methods to be able to, solve your questions. But I think I would want to, maybe if you would just like to respond to her, and then we could basically ask people to, have a discussion around the land-based mitigation measures and the, the discussion that we're basically having here. Yes.
In fact, the policies are there, the laws are there. Protecting land-based wetland, especially, it is a very difficult task. So perhaps our panelists have also mentioned that in the transformative phase, it is the you can say job of scientists, policy makers, and planners who have to sit together to create values in those systems. When people find that maintaining that as a pristine water wetland or water resource will be more helpful to them economically also, because ultimately it is the economics. They have to live, they have to survive. And then people suppose keep yourself in that position. You would like something should come because we have to live in the world, we have to live in a better way. So people don't go for a long-term vision of seeing very good things after, say, 5 or 10 years or 20 years by protecting those land. So here is the challenge for us: how we make, if they are protecting those areas, they get better off. And there have to be models like we were talking about, some good models of conservation which are economically or financially more beneficial to the local communities. And this will also in fact reduce the migration to other places when people can earn. There can be like government's initiative, you see, one is skilling, which is happening in a very good scale, you can say, but our country is so large, the effect comes after a long period. One district, one product, you might have heard. So people are creating with their skill sets, with their knowledge, with their cultural heritage, with their civilizational values. If the people can earn by maintaining those resources in their natural form, that will help. Because we have to see from the both sides why there is so much pressure for encroachment, why there is so much thing for doing illegal things. It is because somehow we are not able to address the genuine aspiration. And this is a complex task. So we have to bring in some good practices, whether people can, with the conservation phase more than changing the resource. Thank you.
Any other question from the floor? No? Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, so I just wanted to add to that. I wanted to change a little bit to what could be the tools suggested by the panelists to incentivize local communities for such conservation mechanisms or.
I think Sir also said that we have to create value for these systems. For example, wetlands, I think one of our panelists also said that they are very huge storehouses of carbon. So if we can really build a carbon project out of this and local communities benefit out of it, or we can design a payment for ecosystem services kind of project, then of course the other thing is, the other way to look at is to create a doomsday scenario. For example, East Kolkata wetland treats the sewage sewage of the Kolkata city. So what would it cost if this is not maintained, to the people of the Kolkata city? So that is another way, to compare costs and benefits and then create value for local communities, is what I feel.
No, I think this is what we were discussing. Even in the land-based actions, what we are saying is that it should be bottom-up, right? So in this case also, as you were saying that these are private, and whosoever comes, they will pay the price, and you will get such a huge price to them that the NRM, the nature-based price, would not be of that competitive. So that is what Archanaji and Subhashji has given, that you have to bring community into consideration, bring that cost value analysis, and then long-term sustainability, because buildings and all will not give you sustainability, water will give you sustainability. Why? And they are linked to nature. Generally people are linked to nature. So if you will give that cost benefit analysis using payment on ecological services is one of the option, then probably there could be a solution.
The point I think you had made initially, this whole disconnect between when we look at the FOLU sector as a carbon, stock, versus disconnecting it from the ecosystem services that the sector provides. And we look at either or, and each of these communities is looking at it in isolation, and possibly we need to look at it together. And then would the value basically be realized that, what is it that you're investing and implementing in? So that holistic approach that you were talking about, and of course, the need for location specific kind of a focus than the macro specific that we had, and we've been doing with the data. I think when we're doing implementation, these kind of projects, we need much more site specific knowledge and know-how in the development and implementation of things, and taking the stakeholders along. One last attempt for a question, and otherwise we'll round up. Yes.
Not a question, but just since she was asking about the tool.
Yeah.
I could recall the teacher.
Sure. I would like to thank all the panelists for their contributions, and I think we will move on to Veena helping with the synthesis and closing the session for us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you all the panelists for the wonderful discussion. Now I request ma'am to present the panelists with a token of appreciation. Thank you. I extend my heartfelt thanks to everyone who has contributed to the success of this event. Special appreciation goes to our esteemed speakers for sharing their valuable insights. I also want to express my gratitude to organizers and all the attendees for their participation and support. With this, we conclude the today's thematic track on just transitions for land-based climate action in India. On behalf of TERI, we extend our gratitude to all the participants participants, speakers, and panelists. Thank you once again for your active participation. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.